Morena. I'm on the right page this time. Morena, tēnā tātou, ngā mihi kia tātou, katahi anō ka tīmata kia whakarongo kia au pānui ana tēnei pukapuka, and ki ira o tātou whai I ēnei pānui, kia kaha ki te whakarongo kia au. I'm trying to make sense of it myself. This is a book called Psychiatric Drugs, The Truth About How They Work and How to Come Off Them by Diana Kopua. If you've only just started tuning in, kei te pai, because I've only just read the introducing, the straight talking introductions. So far it's quite a fair reading. It acknowledges that there are many of us who are stakeholders and have an opinion about mental health problems. There were some key points that I mentioned, which was that many people tend to think, or the whole world actually, tend to think of emotional problems as illnesses. And the problem with seeing emotional problems as illnesses is that they then rest on the shoulders of the experts, and the experts are doctors who specialize in emotional problems, and those are psychiatrists. This book acknowledges that the writer and many of the Critical Psychiatry Network consider mental health problems to be the responsibility of everyone. And if we leave it in the hands of psychiatrists and psychologists, then what happens is that we rely on them to be the experts, and we don't take any responsibility for what we do and how we live with people with mental health problems, and that's all of us. So I'm going to get right in and start from Diana Kopua's introduction. And just so you know, she is a psychiatrist, and it looks like she's talking in first person, so I'll try and make some comments about the readings, and I'll just log into the Facebook page, so just in case you've got some whakaaro and you want to share, I'll try and keep an eye on them. So here we go. Can I just say that if you're on psychotropic medication, this is not me saying come off them immediately. This is me saying, and it's said in the introduction, that knowledge is really, really important. And one of the things that we talked about was language, and in psychiatry we use a language that can be unfamiliar. Joanna's going to use a combination of lay people's language, which is really important, because if mental health problems are for all of us to think about, then we need to use a language that we all understand. And she also refers to the knowledge where she's making points, statements, arguments, countering something that we might think is fact. She puts references in there. She doesn't expect everyone to look in them, but she wants to create an honest evaluation of mental health problems. So there's the book there, and I will start reading for about 15 minutes, I think. Here we go. So, I am a practicing psychiatrist, and I'm not opposed to the use of some psychiatric drugs in some situations. My concern is that we fundamentally misunderstand what psychiatric drugs do, and because of this we overestimate their possible benefits and underestimate the harm they can cause. Thanks, babe. Yes, no, you can go now. He did this yesterday too, but it's coffee, so I'm happy with that. Okay, so her concern is that we fundamentally misunderstand what psychiatric drugs do, and because of this we overestimate their possible benefits and underestimate the harm they can cause. Psychiatric drugs are potentially toxic substances that change the way the body and brain normally work in ways we do not properly understand. Sometimes the risks involved in taking them are worthwhile. Often they are not. This is the message in this book. And just a comment, when I was a psychiatric registrar, so you do 6 years of medicine, and then you are a house officer, where you learn lots of different specialties and then move into specialising in your field, surgery or GP, gynecology. Now, psychiatry is another specialty, and when I was learning psychiatry, the way I learned about the drugs was by reading a book that showed me pictures of the hypotheses of how things work. Well, they showed me how they work, and there was an assumption that meant that that's how we treat or manage mental health problems. Really just sort of rote learning. It has been more than a decade since I wrote the first edition of a straight-talking introduction to psychiatric drugs, also published in a PCCS books. In that time, it has become ever more apparent how little we know about the dangers involved in the use of psychiatric drugs, and how uncertain we remain about any advantage they may confer. In particular, we lack decent research on the harmful consequences of taking these drugs for long periods, even though it is clear that many people use them for years on end. Without proper studies published in scientific journals, people's suffering goes unrecognised. Even when research is published, it is frequently ignored if it suggests something that people in power do not want to hear. This has been the story of antidepressant withdrawals and withdrawal symptoms, and there are many other examples in the mental health arena. The fact that some people experience unpleasant and debilitating effects when coming off drugs that are classified as antidepressants has been recognised for decades. The withdrawal symptoms that occur following discontinuation of the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, SSRI, those type of antidepressants, were described back in the 1990s in an editorial in the British Medical Journal. And just so you know, SSRIs are a particular type of antidepressant that are said to work on a particular area. And SSRIs, examples of SSRIs are fluoxetine, sertraline, citalopram, paroxetine, and fluoxetine's other name for fluoxetine is Prozac. The editorial mentioned that in a minority of people, withdrawal symptoms could be severe or chronic and cause considerable morbidity. Despite this and subsequent coverage, antidepressant prescribing continued to increase steadily year on year. Much of this increase is thought to be due to more people taking the drugs on a long-term basis. Yet most people prescribed antidepressants have not been warned about the likelihood of experiencing a withdrawal symptom when they discontinue the drugs, nor of the possibility that this withdrawal symptom might be prolonged, severe, and disabling. Until 2019, NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists maintained that antidepressant withdrawal symptoms were usually mild and self-limiting and lasted for no more than 1 to 2 weeks. That was what I was told too. This advice was only changed after lobbying by professionals, academics, and those who had experienced withdrawal problems firsthand. This means that an ever-growing number of people have been started on antidepressants without being given information about all the potential risks involved. When people started to complain publicly about the situation and the media ran stories about the dreadful experiences some people had while coming off antidepressants, certain psychiatrists appeared to take it as a personal slur. They described publications about the prevalence and severity of antidepressant withdrawal as a war on antidepressants. They questioned the validity of people's accounts of withdrawal, and they attacked those academics who had dared to publicize the problem. Some issued warnings about the consequences of discouraging people from taking antidepressants. Like predators surrounding their prey, they gathered together and jumped in to silence voices that might damage the reputation of one of psychiatry's central treatments. At the same time as playing down the adverse effects of antidepressants, prominent psychiatrists continue to trumpet the benefits of those drugs and to argue that they should be prescribed more widely. This has continued despite critics, including me, that's Joanna Moncrief, and just for those who have just joined us, the author of this book. And so that included her, but others besides, repeatedly pointing out that the effects of antidepressants are minuscule when compared with a dummy tablet, a placebo tablet, a sugar pill, in scientific randomized trials. These tiny effects are unlikely to have any practical impact and are probably accounted for by methodological limitations of the trials themselves and how they are reported. Emerging evidence also exists that the sexual dysfunction that is a recognised complication of treatment with SSRIs can persist after the drugs are discontinued. This adverse effect has mostly been reported in journals that concern sexual health, but there is little coverage in the psychiatric literature, and most psychiatrists are still unaware of the problem. We do not know how common it is, but even if it affects only a small proportion of those taking SSRIs, this still adds up to a vast number of people worldwide, given how many are taking these drugs each year. The fact that some people suffer from persistent sexual impairment and that withdrawal symptoms can occasionally continue for months or years after the drug has been stopped suggests that these drugs may permanently change the way the brain works. This is, and should be, scary. We do not know the full extent of what psychiatrists do to the brain, nor do we know how able the brain is to recover from their impact. Psychiatric drugs should be a last resort and only used if there is good evidence that they have genuine and worthwhile benefits. Yet instead of adopting a more cautious approach to their use, doctors continue to prescribe them with increasing frequency. More than everyone. The psychiatric field has been slow to recognise the damaging effects associated with some psychiatric drugs. The brain shrinking effects of antipsychotics were first pointed out by American psychiatrist and well-known critic of psychiatric drugs, Peter Breggin, back in the 1980s. For decades, his view was ignored, and the fact that people diagnosed with schizophrenia had visibly smaller brains and larger brain cavities are demonstrated by brain scans. It was interpreted as evidence of the condition itself. So people would take brain scans of, psychiatrists or anyone interested in schizophrenia would take brain scans of those people with schizophrenia and see that their brains were on average smaller and their brain cavities were larger. And antipsychotics were even promoted as being able to slow up the progressive brain damage that was believed to be caused by schizophrenia. Animal research conducted in the early 2000s produced clear evidence that antipsychotics result in brain shrinkage. Let me say that again. Animal research conducted in the early 2000s produced clear evidence that antipsychotics themselves result in brain shrinkage, yet these findings received little attention. It was only in 2011, after the publication of a large study of patients by the former editor of the American Journal of Psychiatry, confirmed this finding, that opinion started to change. I don't know about you, but it's so sad. Some psychiatrists have taken these results seriously and have accepted that we need alternatives to blanket recommendations of antipsychotic treatment for everyone with psychosis. During the 2000s, a Dutch research group conducted the first randomized trial comparing a program of gradual reduction of antipsychotics with continuous maintenance treatment in people who had had a first episode of psychosis. No previous studies had looked at the effects of gradually reducing antipsychotics. Earlier studies had also only looked at short-term results, but the Dutch group followed up their trial participants 7 years later. The results suggested that helping people to reduce and helping people to reduce and discontinue antipsychotic medication can improve social functioning and recovery in the long run, compared with insisting that people remain on maintenance treatment. I'll just pause there because that's quite a lot. Atamari hine rose, kia ora lele, morena. Thank you for sharing that, Lulu. Kia ora everyone. Feel free to comment or ask questions. Morena hone. Morena Elizabeth. Morena Tans. Kia ora everyone watching. Morena Faye, Atamari. Kia ora Howie. Howie the Maori. Kia ora. Morena to everyone watching. Morena, here we go. Whetu, kia ora. Empathetic spiritualism is hard to cure, so dumb it downs pills via medicine. It's the solution, but how can medicine cure something spiritual? Usually does more harm than good. Even prescribing psychedelic on enhancing symptoms visually and sound, especially if one's pineal gland has been open. Usually the beginning journey for most that begin their journey through this is your whakaaro, wonderful, and I agree with you. Giving medication to suppress us being able to feel is not necessarily the best approach, although there are some times when people want it, and I wouldn't dispute that. But as you can see, it's this idea that there are people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and we are still talking to people who are diagnosed with schizophrenia and their families as if schizophrenia is this thing that actually is a forever thing, and that you must stay on the medication forever. And what we're seeing is that we evidence this by brain scans showing a shrinking brain and increased brain cavities, when actually the antipsychotics themselves, which I like to call major tranquilizers, not antipsychotics, and they were the things that were causing these changes in the brain. And also the fact that it was ignored, this animal study was ignored, and it wasn't, even the person that went on and did the research was someone that was the former editor of a journal that we have struggled with, journals to accept evidence of a different understanding, and if it doesn't suit those in power, it's not being published. And there are many people that are talking about the racism within journals, medical journals as well. And then remember, during the 2000s, a Dutch research group conducted the first randomized control trial. If you didn't read my reading, if you didn't listen to the reading yesterday, I talked about randomized control trials and how they are considered the gold standard. Not the only way of validating evidence of providing good outcomes. But anyway, they went on to do this randomized control trial where you put people who are on medication randomly into a group, and then gradually reducing the antipsychotics and monitoring them. And those people were people who had a first episode of, and they use the word psychosis, I use the word madness, or I like what Whetu talked about, that spiritual experience, and you can't say that it's not. If someone says that they're having a spiritual experience, then that's their narrative. Whatever you want to call something where you might be voice hearing, you might be believing in something that others aren't believing in, people are struggling to understand you, your words are scrambled, your thinking scrambled, whatever you want to call that. This group measured slow reductions, and 7 years after discontinuing that medication, they found an improved social functioning and recovery in the long run, compared with an insistence that people stay on medication treatment long term. I hope that was helpful. I haven't quite finished, but we can carry on tomorrow. That my whakaaro is that as a psychiatrist, I've done all those things that they're talking about. I was trained to see that people with schizophrenia need to remain on the medication in order to sustain, to have a quality life, to be able to function in their community. And my thinking was that it would stop their voices, at least calm them down, that it would help them to not think things were real when they weren't. For example, that their partner was having an affair and they weren't. And sure, some of the things they were thinking were debatable, but it was also scrambling the way they were thinking. They were losing sleep. They were not toe. So the idea of giving them an antipsychotic so that they could function sort of made sense. Now I know that there's studies that weren't published because they weren't the flavour of the day, that I wasn't taught them. I was taught that the NICE, this institute, their guidelines were what I needed to refer to for good evidence. I would read publication articles to learn how to really impart knowledge to my people. And I shared with so many people that the idea that this medication was helpful. And it did help many people, but at the same time, I was one of those psychiatrists that did not let you know about the negative impacts of this medication. And I did not know about that study as early as 2011, when I was a junior, or I've forgotten what you call us, a psychiatric trainee, a registrar. On my training, doing my exams, did not know about that study. And so now, for any of you who are on that medication, I urge you to go to your GPs, to go to your psychiatrist and quote this book, quote the evidence, and have a discussion. It's okay to disagree respectfully if you find that they're putting their walls up and that they are very strong in their opinions and that they differ to this book. Then bring more people into the meeting so that it can be a wānanga. Bring your whānau in and just posit the idea and get the psychiatrist to see an argument from both sides. We are very, very busy people, and I have to believe that we all have the best interests at heart. So I hope this was helpful. Have a great morning. It's a little bit depressing, huh? Have a great morning though, and I'll try again tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock to carry on with this reading. Ngā mihi nui nui kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.